So thank you to the organisers for allowing me to speak today. I actually want to talk to you about what we have done to reformulate our breakfast cereals here in Australia and New Zealand, but also to take you through some of the challenges that we face when doing that. Now, if you've seen me present before, you may have come across some of the product tastings that we do, where we talk through some of the challenges of pulling out sugar or adding fibre in. Given the volume of people here today, I'm certainly not going to do that today, but if you're interested in finding out more, please do let me know. So first of all, who is CPW? You may not know us under our business name, Cereal Partners Worldwide. We're actually a joint venture between Nestlé and General Mills, and we make breakfast cereals around the world, everywhere except North America, Iceland and Canada, which is the General Mills territory. What do we produce? You probably know us better under our brand name. So we basically make breakfast cereals under both the Uncle Toby's and Nestlé brands. We make over 40 breakfast cereals here in Australia and New Zealand. And as a result, I would say that we have quite a large footprint on the food supply. And certainly in the oats area, you may also see some of the Milo cereal products as well, which you may not know that we make. What have we done? Well, about 5 years ago, as many other industry nutritionists do, we conducted a nutrition review of our breakfast cereals. And we went on a journey to actually make all of our breakfast cereals Heart Foundation tick approved. And as a result of some of those changes, many of which took a number of years, and I'll take you through some of that, we can now say today that every one of our Nestlé and Uncle Toby's breakfast cereals are at least a source of fibre, at least a source of whole grain. They meet the Food and Health Dialogue sodium targets for cereals, and in fact, in one case, we actually pulled out the sodium in one hit, and quite a significant amount, in order to do that. They all meet the Heart Foundation's tick nutrient criteria. They also all pass the FSAN's nutrient profiling criteria. So, in fact, if we wanted to carry a health claim on our cereals, we could do. And since there's been so much talk about stars today, I thought you might like to know that they actually all score at least 3.5 stars or more, with the vast majority scoring 4 stars or more. So what have we done? I'm just going to take you through a few examples, because there's actually quite a lot that we've done across our cereals. Specifically on Milo, we actually doubled the fibre, doubled the whole grain, and halved the saturated fat in the product, which led to small reductions in sodium and sugar as well. So here you can see some of those changes. We actually knew that it was going to take us a long time to do that, because the changes in terms of where we were starting from and where we wanted to get to was going to take quite some time. And it's important to understand it is about transitioning that consumer over time. We also needed to understand that, the consumer may not have the cereal more than once or twice in a year. Therefore, to go to a change too quickly could be too radical a change. I'm struggling to see everyone over the mic. In terms of Cheerios, again, we reduced the sodium by about 35% between 2008 and 2013. We reduced sugar, and we went down to 15% because we knew that consumers of this particular product were more concerned about sugar. We also increased fibre by about a third, and we increased whole grain from about 56% up to about 74%, I think. But as you can see, it wasn't without compromise. So here you can actually see some of the impacts on product texture, and you end up with more of a concave O shape, which Cheerios is synonymous with. You will also, if you've ever tried the product, notice that it does actually go stale slightly quicker because of the increased whole grain content, which naturally brings some fat to the product. And also because it has less of a sugar coating, its bowl life is slightly changed as well. So there are some compromises that you're making in doing that. There are, yeah, there is a bowl life. It is a term. When it comes to Vitabrits, you probably haven't heard about the change we made. But if you actually look at Vitabrits today, there are actually mineral salts added into the product. We actually changed some equipment at the factory just through an upgrade, and as a result, we're losing less salt through steam in the product. So actually more salt was being retained in the final product. So we actually went about looking at how we could reduce sodium to actually keep the sodium level at the levels that we were declaring to start with. We also challenged R&D to say, can we bring the sodium levels down further than that? Because certainly compared to its competitor product, it's made slightly differently and it has slightly more sodium in it. The reality is, and I think somebody talked about this earlier, if you put too much sodium in, you don't get you can't actually break the bricks. So many consumers want to be able to do that. It ends up solid. So we certainly don't want to put too much in there. If you put too little in, the layers don't stick together, and so you end up with just, wafer bits in your box. So it is quite a delicate challenge, and you can start to understand some of the challenges that we do face. This initiative actually added about $100,000 per year to our product. And we can't realise that through, the cost to the consumer. So we're actually absorbing that because we wanted to make sure that we retained the sodium at the level that we were declaring. And then in terms of oat sachets, quite a popular product. This particular one is our best-selling product, the Creamy Honey range, followed by actually the plain product in the quick sachet product. We actually reduced sugar in this, and it launched this year, so I'll let you know how it performs. But it was a very small reduction that we had to do because sugar really does impact the taste. What we've done is we've put in a natural flavour to enhance the honey flavour that you lose when you remove some of the sugar. So we've actually gone down by, I think, from 26.5% to about 25%. Not a massive reduction, but nevertheless the intent is there. So again, some of these things don't necessarily get talked about to the consumer, but the intent is there, and food industry is trying to reformulate. I guess some of the challenges that we face as the food industry is to know, where do you actually start? What is the definition of a healthier choice? And when you talk to product developers, I can tell you they get pretty frustrated when you say to them, okay, well, if it's going to go into schools, it's got to meet this criteria. There's stars potentially coming in, we've got to look at that. Do you want to look at endorsements? So, for example, is GI important to that consumer? Is the tick? There are so many different criteria that actually it can be very difficult to try and navigate your way through that, particularly for a product developer. Some of these are category specific. Some of these are a one-size-fits-all model. And in some cases, whether or not you're going to see a change can involve such a huge leap in whether it's sugar reduction, fiber increase, you never know, that it can be a disincentive. So it's important that those criteria need to be A, consistent, and B, reasonable and easy to actually achieve, or more easy to achieve. When it comes to how we talk about these reformulations to the consumer, it's important to understand that we have to look at each consumer of that product in isolation. The consumer isn't a clone. So in other words, many of you are probably up here in this top quadrant. I don't think we have a pointer, do we? So you're more conscious about health. That's probably what's drawn you into health. You may be more likely to be an oats consumer or a Weet-Bix consumer or even a muesli consumer. So you're more conscious of health. Health drives more of the purchase intent when it comes to cereals. But you have to remember that there are also some consumers of cereals who really are either going to skip breakfast, are more likely to have a breakfast drink on the go, or are really more driven by taste. And so it's really important to understand where the consumer is coming from, and that actually the impact that health and nutrition can have on them can really differ depending on the product that we're talking about, or indeed the initiative you're trying to bring about. And I think health initiatives really need to look at all those different types of consumer, because the consumer is not one homogeneous person. You are not a clone of the person sat next to you. I'm often asked this question, so I thought I'd actually put up the slide, which is, well, why do you sell Milo cereal? Okay, we've actually done quite a lot to reformulate it, but why do you sell it at all? And the assumption is that if we didn't sell Milo cereal, that consumer would have oats instead. The reality is, that this isn't going to happen. And if you look at the dotted line, anything above the dotted line is actually showing where the consumer of Milo cereal over-indexes. So in other words, what they're most likely to buy between, what their repertoire actually is. What you can see here is that they're much more likely to purchase Cocoa Pops, Nutri-Grain, or indeed a breakfast drink if Milo cereal didn't exist. And actually, almost none would consume oats instead. There might be a few that might consume oat sachets. And obviously that's only looking at cereal. That's not even looking at the breakfast context more broadly and some of the other categories of foods that they may choose from. So hopefully that answers your question. Do nutrition improvements drive sales? This is a question that we're often asked, both internally within the business, but also by health advocates. It can do, and certainly in cereal, it's a category where that can happen. Not all categories are driven by that, though. And it can be really challenging to maintain those sales. So, if all very well that you've made your improvements, but if your competitor product is on a half-price promotion, they're probably not going to consume your product. They'd rather go for the cheaper product that maybe they think tastes better. So it's a real challenge in the retailing environment to really drive sales through nutrition alone. And it's actually quite difficult to show that return on investment back to the business. Nutrition can motivate some consumers, but not necessarily all. And there can be ongoing consumer challenges. So, whoops, I'm going to move over. If you look at this is our Facebook page. We talked about some of the reformulations we did on Cheerios, and they don't really believe that we've reduced the sugar in the product. So what do you do? So you're sometimes damned if you do and damned if you don't. Price point can also be really important, and I talked a little bit about promotions. Also, as you reformulate your product, you're adding in cost. And invariably that can increase your cost of goods, and it can also change your product density. So in other words, you may have a heavier product that doesn't take up as much space in the box, so suddenly your product doesn't look like it's the same value as the product sat next to it. So those are some of the considerations that we also need to look at. There's also ongoing pressure in the retailing environment, as I'm sure many of you know, and there's really pressure to retain those high-performing SKUs. In other words, those that are going to either bring people into the store, are popular, or are profitable. In summary, obviously, I've shown that food companies are actively looking for ways to reformulate and innovate to deliver more nutritious products. I've talked a little bit about what we've done, and certainly all of our breakfast cereals do provide at least a source of fibre, at least a source of whole grain, and meet the Heart Foundation's TIC criteria. But the challenges do remain. And I would say that, I'm not going to go through all of those here, but making these products tasty is an important part of the piece, because at the end of the day, if the consumer doesn't eat it, you're impacting absolutely nobody. So what do I think are the opportunities? And I had a bit of a think about this. I would say that translating the dietary guidelines into consistent messages that are practical at both the meal and product level are part of the challenges we face, and probably where sometimes we conflict. This would help to guide consumers at meal times, guide consistency in messaging across the food chain, and could provide portion guidance that works at a product level. Development of consistent nutrient criteria. I talked about this earlier. As the food industry, you're faced with so many different criteria, and the changes required to meet some of those can be quite different and take you off in very different directions, and sometimes lead to unintended consequences. So consistency of criteria would be great. And working together to promote core food consumption rather than simply talking about the discretionary foods that we should avoid. And I think the consumer, how do we look at that at a product level and at a meal level as well? Because I think the consumer would also like some guidance there. And obviously looking to target the different consumer types, not just going to the extreme ends or looking at pure core foods. Some of the gaps, as I said, the consumer is not a clone of you. Can we successfully target different consumer types with a solution that seeks to transition the diet of each consumer type towards a better one? And reformulations, they do add cost, and so can healthier options be more expensive, both for manufacturers to produce and for consumers to buy. They may also offer less profit for the retailer, and there was some talk about that earlier about how do we ensure that they're driving sales, that the consumers are purchasing them, and that also there's an incentive for everyone to bring those to market. So can we look at ways to address this in a sustainable way for all involved? That's it.